Okay. Good morning, everyone. Hello, and welcome to the New York Metropolitan Transportation Council's Program, Finance, and Administration Committee meeting. I'm Ian Francis, representative of New York State Department of Transportation and acting chair of PFAC. This meeting is being held virtually as a webinar provided in Governor Cuomo's Emergency Executive Order number 202-109. This webinar is being recorded and will be posted on the NYMTC website within the next 2 weeks. The audience lines will remain muted throughout the meeting. The chat pod is being monitored by NYMTC staff. Any comments that are typed into the chat pod that are relevant to transportation and planning will be reviewed and included in the meeting synopsis. During the public participation section of the agenda, registered participants will be unmuted individually. At this time, I will begin the roll call. When I announce your agency, I ask each representative to state your name and whom you're representing. New York City Department of Transportation. New York City Department of Transportation.
Oh, sorry, I had to unmute myself.
Okay.
New York City, this is Yogesh Sanghvi, representing Commissioner Henry Gutman.
Thank you, Yogesh. New York City Department of City Planning.
Good morning, Ian. Jack Schmidt, representing City Planning Commission Chair Marisa Lago.
Thank you, Jack. All right, MTA.
Hi, good morning. This is Julia Seltzer, representing Pat Foy, Chairman.
Thank you, Julia. Is Nassau County on the line?
Hi, Sean Sally, representing County Executive Laura Curran.
Good morning, Sean.
Good morning.
All right, Suffolk County.
Hi, this is Chris Chatterton, representing County Executive Steve Ballone.
Thank you, Chris. Rockland County.
Pat Gurdon, representing Rockland County Exec Ed Day.
Thank you, Pat. Putnam County.
Sandra Fusco, representing Mary Ellen Odell, Putnam County Executive.
Good morning, Sandra. Westchester County.
Naomi Klein, representing County Executive George Latimer.
Thank you. FTA.
Dan Moser, representing FTA Region 2, Administrator Stephen.
Thank you, Dan. FHWA.
Good morning. This is Gautam Mani, FHWA New York Division, representing Division Administrator Rick Markey.
Thank you, Gautam. New Jersey Transit. Okay, New Jersey Transit. All right, NJTPA.
Hi, this is David Barron, representing NJTPA Executive Director Mary Amin.
Good morning, David. US EPA.
Good morning, this is Hannah Greenberg, EPA Region 2, representing Acting Regional Administrator Walter Mugden.
Thank you, Hannah. Port Authority.
Good morning, this is Jay Sheffield, representing Executive Director Rick Cotton.
Thank you, Jay. And New York State DEC. New York State DEC. All right, they may not be with us today. And I am Ian Francis, representing Commissioner Maria Teresa Dominguez of the New York State Department of Transportation. Thank you. And by my count, under our operating procedures, we have a quorum for today's meeting. The first portion of our meeting will be a presentation, and which is titled Statewide Public Transportation Update, and it's given by Robert Zerrillo. NYMTC's Assistant Director, Deborah Nelson, will introduce our guest speaker. Please unmute Deborah and Bob Zerrillo's microphone. Thanks.
Hello, everyone. It's my pleasure to introduce today Bob Zerrillo, who is a familiar face to many of us. Bob is currently the Policy Director at the New York Public Transit Association, and he's responsible for that association's policy research, policy development, and government advocacy. But prior to that, Bob served as the Acting Assistant Commissioner of Policy and Planning at New York State DOT. In that capacity, he managed the transportation planning activities, developed the state transportation policy and infrastructure investment programs for all modes, and he also developed positions on the federal transportation programs. He also, in that capacity, served as the chair to this committee of the PFAC, NYMTC PFAC. So welcome back, Bob. It's nice to have you here. Today, Bob will be presenting on the New York statewide public transportation update. Please join me in welcoming Bob. Again, thank you, Bob, for being here.
Great. Good morning, everyone. Thank you, Deb, for that introduction. And thank you to PFAC members for inviting me today. It's good to see some familiar faces and also a few NYPTA transit members in your mix. And for those of you who I have not met, it's nice to meet you virtually today. I'd just like to take a few minutes to talk about statewide public transportation, provide an update. Since many of you are familiar with the MTA, I will not present a lot of detail on the MTA and concentrate more on the transit systems around the state. So could I have the next slide, please? So New York State is really blessed to have an extensive and diverse system of public transportation across the state. There are regional transportation authorities that handle multi-county transit service. You're all familiar with the MTA and the 12 counties that MTA serves. There's also regional authorities in the Niagara Frontier out in Buffalo, Rochester, Genesee area around Rochester, in Albany, the Capital District has an authority, and in Syracuse, Central New York Regional Transportation Authority. Beyond the authorities, there's also a great deal of public transportation provided by counties. In the downstate suburbs, there's large county bus systems in Nassau, Suffolk, Westchester, and systems in Putnam, Dutchess, Orange, and Rockland. And those services operate separately, independent from the MTA. Our small urbanized areas, our small cities upstate have small urban transit systems, places like Binghamton, Elmira, Ithaca, Kingston. Almost every county in New York State has public transit service. So most of the 32 rural counties have some sort of public transportation service. And then as you know, there's commuter bus services into New York City from the Hudson Valley. There are intercity bus services that connect cities across the state. And then downstate, you have the PATH system and the New York City Ferry Network. Next slide, please. So this just to show the map of New York State. A dot represents a transit system. And basically, there is a transit system in nearly every county in New York State, except one county up in the Adirondack Mountains. Next slide, please. You all know the MTA is the largest transit system in North America and one of the largest in the world. But if you pool and combine the transit services around the rest of the state, in the downstate suburbs and in the upstate cities and rural areas, if combined, they would be the 7th largest transit system in the country. So we have a great deal of transit in New York. The systems around the state are dwarfed by the size of the MTA, but they are considerable. And in most other states, they'd be considered larger transit systems. Next slide, please. So over the past 15 months, the impacts of COVID have really dominated transit services and financial issues. Since March of 2020, as you all know, there was an immediate impact on ridership and revenue from the governor's stay-at-home orders and the close down of the economy. And that had an immediate impact on public transportation. Ridership went to near zero almost immediately in transit systems across the state. There were transit employee impacts. Transit employees contracted the virus, and sadly, a number of them passed away. Most of them in the MTA system. But most transit employees came to work. They provided service that allowed essential workers to get to work. And that was a critical, important impact on the economy and the ability of the state to function even during the early days of the pandemic. Transit had an evolving response early in the pandemic as transit systems learned to deal with lower ridership and deal with other issues such as cleaning, in developing cleaning materials and protocols, testing various chemicals to make sure that transit surfaces and the environment was clean. If you remember back 15 months ago, obtaining personal protective equipment was a real challenge for the public, transit systems, businesses, everyone scrambled to get masks and gloves and other equipment. Transit systems implemented a number of operational changes to deal with the pandemic. To be able to protect their bus drivers, they went to rear door boarding. And during that time, many systems stopped collecting fares and implemented driver barriers, protective barriers to protect the driver from customers. And there were numerous service adjustments. Some transit systems maintained near full service. Others cut back service to only services needed to handle essential workers. So a lot of changes in operations during this last 15-month period. State transit aid was reduced because of the loss in revenues to the state from the impact on the economy. And if you remember back, the Federal CARES Act, which was passed in March of 2020, provided an influx of transit funding, and that's really what allowed transit services to be maintained over the last 15-month period while transit revenues were decimated and state taxes were decimated. Next slide, please. So the current impact of the pandemic on transit services, ridership and passenger revenue are still below pre-pandemic levels. For some of the larger systems, ridership has returned to around 60 to 70% of pre-pandemic levels. For some of the smaller systems, especially upstate, that are dependent on colleges and universities for some of their ridership, their passenger ridership and revenue is down closer to 40 to 50%. As you know, the MTA subways was severely impacted, the bus system as well, and they're coming back slowly, along with the commuter rail network, which was definitely impacted until employees return to Manhattan. Commuter rail ridership will be slow to recover. Most transit services have been restored since the pandemic. There's still some services that need to be analyzed and to match their ridership levels of today, which are in some cases different than pre-pandemic levels. But many of the systems that had reduced ridership have nearly fully restored or have fully restored service. Our state dedicated revenues that fund transit are rising. They're coming back. The economy is coming back. So that's a helpful sign that hopefully in the next few months and from the next year's budget, revenues will be fully back. And federal relief funding that has come in is committed to funding the multi-year revenue shortfalls of transit. As ridership remains below pre-pandemic levels, passenger revenue is less than what it was before. That's obviously an impact on transit finances, and the federal relief funding will help balance that over the next year or two until ridership and revenue comes back. Next slide, please. So the future is still uncertain. We're coming out of the pandemic, and the governor made his announcement a couple days ago. as vaccine rates have risen. But there's still a number of uncertainties affecting public transportation. The multi-year finances are still an issue as passenger revenues are down and tax revenues are from the state are not fully recovered yet. There's still additional costs for cleaning and disinfecting as transit tries to ensure that they're safe from the virus and safe for customers. As I mentioned, the slow return of ridership and revenue. It's coming back and it's working up slowly, and it's really dependent on the fully reopening of the economy. It's dependent on the return of employers and employees to downtown workplaces. And as the economy recovers, hopefully workers will return and the pace of reopening will accelerate. A number of transit systems, mostly upstate, are very dependent on public school and college transportation plans. And those are still evolving, but it seems like in the fall, most universities and public schools will be going back to in-person classes. So that's a positive sign for those transit systems who depend on that revenue as part of their budgets. And dedicated tax revenues that the state collects are on the rise. And especially one that's especially important upstate is the auto rental fee, which was decimated during the pandemic. And we need those revenues to return, but how fast they fully return and grow in the future is still a question. Next slide. So just a quick update on the state budget that was passed a couple of months ago. Because of the impact of the pandemic on state revenues, the State Operating Assistance Program, STOA, appropriations that were enacted this past April were down about 12% for the suburban county systems. They were down about 3% for the upstate transit systems. And as you all know, MTA funding was down as well because of the impact of the dedicated tax revenues. But one of the good signs was that the withholdings that the state had enacted last year because of the uncertainties of the pandemic, those budget withholdings were restored in April. As far as capital funding goes, the state budget maintained capital funding at a flat level for MTA and for the non-MTA systems. And part of the reason for that is envisioning action at the federal level on reauthorization and possibly, hopefully, a infrastructure plan. So the state was waiting to see what actions would happen at the federal level. And there was also one big ticket item in the state budget, and that was the $1.3 billion for the Empire Station project. Federal relief funding, as I mentioned, was critically important to maintaining operations. There were 3 rounds of transit funding over the last 15 months. And then importantly, there was the $12 billion that the state received in federal relief funding, and it's that $12 billion that helped restore some of the transit budget withholdings and budget cuts. But next slide, please. So just a quick update on capital needs around the state. As you all know, the MTA is in the second year of their 5-year 2020 to 24 capital program, approved at $52 billion. The other systems, the non-MTA systems, are in the second year of flat funding. The state did not enact a 5-year multi-year plan for the non-MTA systems or the DOT highway program while they're awaiting action on federal reauthorization. So the non-MTA transit systems, unfortunately, are running on a 2-year basis and looking forward to a multi-year plan in the next year or so. 2 years ago, NYMTC did a capital funding study on what the needs were for the non-MTA systems, and found that there were about $1.7 billion in infrastructure needs across the state, resources of only about $700 million, leaving a 5-year gap of about $1 billion in capital funding. Much of that funding is for state of good repair type projects. Half of it is for just bus replacements. So there's not a lot of a capacity expansion or enhancements in this capital needs study that we did for these other systems. Certainly there are needs to expand and do other things, but they're not part of this study. So hopefully there'll be action on a multi-year capital program for non-MTA systems in the next year or so. The other two big capital issues out there are the surface transportation reauthorization, which is an extremely important source for capital funding for MTA and non-MTA transit as well. And then, as I mentioned, the federal infrastructure package will hopefully provide additional resources there. Next slide. And beyond the basic, normal, traditional transit infrastructure, there's action on expanding and transitioning transit to electric vehicles. The MTA is moving towards electric vehicles. It wants to be fully electric or zero emissions by 2040. And last year, the governor announced that 5 other transit systems in the Capital District, Niagara Frontier, Rochester, Westchester, and Suffolk County would also transition to battery electric buses with 25% of their fleets transitioning by 2025 and 100% electric by 2035. 2 large systems, Nice Bus and Nassau County and Syracuse in central New York, are largely CNG bus fleets right now, and they're not part of that battery electric bus transition. But there are some other systems that are piloting battery electric buses. Nice plans on testing some battery electric buses in the near future. The TCAT system in Ithaca, which serves Cornell University, they have just purchased 7 electric buses and putting them in service now. And in Ulster County, the Kingston area is planning on purchasing several electric buses as well. So it's not just the systems that the governor mandated transition. There are other transit systems across the state that are looking at zero emission vehicles. And there are significant issues, obviously, with moving to this new technology beyond just the cost of the vehicle, which hopefully will come down in the future. But right now, electric vehicles are nearly twice the price of a diesel bus. But there are other costs well beyond that that are challenging. The charging equipment to make sure that these vehicles are charged appropriately. The upgrades to facilities and other infrastructure to be able to accommodate the electric vehicles and the charging equipment. So the garages and other facilities need considerable upgrading and in some cases redesign. Connecting to the electric grid and making sure there's sufficient power to charge several hundred transit buses at a time is a challenge, and working with the utilities to make sure that's ready to go is an additional cost. And these costs, as I said, are above and beyond the core needs that I mentioned for non-MTA systems on the previous slide. So it's a considerable task, certainly one that transit embraces in moving to zero emission vehicles, but the challenge of finding the finances is also an important issue. Next slide, please. So this is where the MPOs and NYMTC can help our transit planners, to be able to plan for the future with this new uncertainty coming out of the pandemic. Which trips are going to return and which will return to transit, which will not? What's the future of commuting and telecommuting as businesses allow some virtual work to continue and others require employees to return to their downtown offices? What are the future mode shares for transit versus automobiles and other modes? What other travel options are out there besides TNCs? Now there's micro transit, bike sharing, car sharing, scooters, so other travel options and what part of the market that they'll take. What are the customer preferences on how they travel? What's the role of technology? A huge issue, especially in transit, as they move to new technology. And achieving the state's climate change goals at the same time will hopefully give more impetus and provide more resources to be able to improve and expand public transportation to achieve those goals. Next slide. So transit systems are not waiting to have the answers to all those questions. Even before the pandemic hit, transit systems across the state were working on a number of improvements. A number of transit network redesigns were underway. The MTA was doing their borough bus system redesigns that was interrupted by the pandemic. Rochester just implemented a complete reorganization and redesign of their Monroe County, Rochester area service. The suburban counties, the big counties, Westchester, Nassau, Suffolk, are doing mobility and redesign studies now. And even those that aren't doing formal studies are continuing to look at their service levels and either tweaking or making major adjustments based on ridership changes and needs to move essential workers and others based on the impacts of the pandemic. Bus rapid transit is being expanded in a number of areas, being studied in a number of others. The Capital District here in Albany has 2 bus rapid transit systems routes operating now, and a third in the planning stage for implementation in 2022, I believe. We have MTA Select Bus Network, expansive network and growing. Suffolk County studying at least 2 north-south bus rapid transit lines for implementation. In Buffalo, they're looking at extending the Buffalo light rail system to the suburbs and to SUNY Buffalo. Next slide, please. Technology is a huge issue. Transit is trying to move as quickly as they can to implement the new technology and new mobility options, new fare payment, mobile fare payment, contactless fare payment systems like the MTA Omni system that's rolling out. And in Rochester, they've just rolled out a new fare payment system. Expanding real-time schedule info, when's the next bus coming, when's the next train coming, is critically important to the customers to be able to know and make transit more attractive. Integrated trip planning so that you could make a trip on a bus and also rent your bike share at the other end of the trip, or pay for your transit fare and pay for the bike share together in one app. There's a need to provide or partner or integrate with other mobility options. Microtransit, which is small on-demand services, are being implemented in Rochester and in Capital District right now. With those authorities are operating those microtransit services themselves. Micromobility options like bike sharing, scooters, how to partner transit with those newer options. Those are very often transit riders who use those other micromobility options. And then dealing with the transportation network companies, TNCs. Transit systems are talking and working with them. I'm not aware of any formal partnerships in New York. I know there's some around the country, but certainly TNCs have a share of the market that'll continue, and public transit will have to deal with that. So next slide, please. So just a couple of personal observations to close on. So these are not NYMTC policy, and they may not apply to every transit system, but in looking around the country and looking across our state and hearing from our more innovative transit managers, here are some of the things that we think need to happen in the next few years for transit to continue to thrive and as we move out of the pandemic. Of course, the first is to promote that transit is safe and not a transmitter of the virus. and I expect cleaning protocols to continue for some time to prove to customers that transit is clean and safe. Many places, especially in the suburbs and upstate, there needs to be increases in frequency so there's more reliable service. A bus every 30 minutes is not really a reliable public transportation system. And that's what some of the upstate communities have to deal with during before the pandemic and coming out of the pandemic. So transit needs to really have increased frequencies to be reliable to its customers. Need to reimagine transit and innovate, look at ways to become providers of mobility options, and several of our upstate authorities are doing that. Capital District Transportation Authority here in Albany, besides running the transit system in the BRT, as I mentioned, has now started a micro transit on-demand service. They also run the regional bike share program, and they're implementing scooters as well. Running all those things from one transit system may not be for everybody, but certainly a number of transit systems are looking to provide more options themselves. We need to integrate with other partners like TNCs. One of the most important things is to invest in technology, anything that can make transit easier to use for our customers and to entice the non-customers to come over and become customers. Is important. And the technology that we mentioned earlier, like fare payment and mobile apps, integrated trip planning, real-time information, all those things make transit easier to use. And I think maybe the last thing, certainly not last in importance, but last on the list that we've learned during the pandemic is that maybe just total transit ridership is not the best measure of transit success. Transit ridership is down. It'll be some time and maybe a long time before it ever returns to pre-pandemic levels. But certainly the pandemic showed how important transit was, even at reduced ridership levels, by carrying essential workers. Should we measure new metrics like essential trips? Is that a better measure of success? Or access to other mobility options, so that providing other access to options like bike share or TNCs or microtransit or walking, reducing VMT or improving air quality. Is an important metric. Should that be maybe higher on the scale is a metric for transit, or how transit makes communities better. The land use and transit-oriented development aspect, walkability of cities, and how can transit do that better, and how does it make communities better? So just a few ideas there. I'm sure there's others, but that's basically the presentation I wanted to make today. Happy to answer any questions if there's some time, and certainly look forward to seeing you all again and working with you in the future. Thank you.
Thank you, Bob. Are there any do the members have any questions for Bob? We appreciate the presentation. It's very good. We'll now move on to the public participation. We've set aside 15 minutes of the agenda to hear from participants who have registered to speak with prepared remarks. We'll hear from those participants in the order they've registered for the duration of the allotted time. We ask that all participants limit their comments to relevant transportation and planning-related items and to less than 3 minutes, so we can hear from as many speakers as possible in the allotted time. The first registered speaker is Murray Bowden. Please unmute Murray Bowden's microphone.
Have you unmuted my microphone?
I can hear you, Murray. You can proceed.
Okay, so would you please put my picture up there and take the agenda down? Everybody's seen the agenda, but they haven't seen me.
Sorry, Murray, it can be done.
Can't be done? Okay. My name is Murray Bowden. I'm 88 years old and I'm in failing mental health and failing physical health. So you'll have to take that into consideration with my comments. I've listed them here on a piece of paper so that I try not to forget them. The information that you're using is based on the Manual of Uniform Traffic Control Devices, which was written maybe 30 years ago. I don't know how many of you use a Prince's phone. That's that push button phone that was popular just about the time that the manual was written. Well, everybody now has a flip phone or iPhone or whatever. I'm looking for a wheelchair because pretty soon I'll be in a wheelchair like a lot of other people because my legs are failing. Do you ever think that when we get out of a car in a handicapped parking space and get into the wheelchair, we're directed into traffic? You all spend immutable time on crosswalks and protecting the pedestrian. Yet if I get into the wheelchair, which I will be doing in the next couple of days, because as soon as I get a wheelchair, I will go to every single meeting in a wheelchair. Not so easy. I get out of the car, I'm in a parking lot, the crosswalk is God knows where, and I have to go through traffic to get to it. Now, you've been doing that for what, 30, 40 years, and you completely forget that the people with handicaps are just plain people. My license plate has a handicap sticker on it because I'm handicapped. They changed it this year to be about an inch tall. We're not announcing that we're handicapped. We're just people who need a parking space that's closer. Now, that was done by the governor's staff, and it was done correctly. Handicapped people are just like any other people. Now, railroad crossings. That crossbuck was designed 100, 200 years ago. I don't know any driver today who doesn't go to a railroad crossing. We have on many of the bridges, the Willis Avenue Bridge, gates and traffic lights. Why do they have red flashing lights at railroad crossing? Because they can't stop. The experts know what they do, but if you stand and watch an older driver, they have no idea what you're talking about. You go to a traffic light, the light turns green, nobody moves. Why? Because they're texting. So why do you expect when they lift their eyes up, they're going to understand that the channelizing line where there's a white line on both sides of a split in the road tells them anything? Driver needs to know that on their left is a yellow line everywhere they go. You got police cars. When there's an accident on the other side of the highway, they got their headlight, their red flashing lights. You get rubbernecking to the accidents all over the place. We don't need to know there's an accident in the other direction on a divided highway. But we've always done it that way. So the problem has now become the experts that we're relying on, who've devoted their careers to this, in global warming turn out to be not so much experts. It's embarrassing to spend your entire career supporting something that's now irrelevant. Texas Utilities ran out of electricity. I get an email from Con Edison every day telling me how much electricity I use and reduce it, please. So what do? We know we're in a global warming crisis. California has the biggest fire problem in years. And we've got experts telling us, well, we're going to electrify and tell you when the next train is coming. But why do you blow the railroad whistle half a mile down a train track when a train's going 60 miles an hour when you could put at that gate a horn that says beep, beep, and only sound the horn at the gate that's closing? I live in Hartsdale, not closer than 5 miles to the nearest railroad track. I hear the train horns from Rockland County. Why? I can't stop them. You can. It is your responsibility to deal with these issues, not mine. I'm gone. I've learned I have no influence and I'm not even going to try it. There's a big thing going on between me and the New York State Thruway because they have the exit lines illegally marked. And Matt Driscoll was on a telephone call for me for 18 minutes, and it's documented. Why? Because I said he ought to get fired because he isn't doing safe roads. Now, is our job safety or not? If you have safer roads, then you have less police. Well, the police don't like it, they'll lose their jobs. If you have safer roads, there'll be less fire engines because you'll have less accidents, and they don't want to make it road safer because they'll lose their jobs. So there's a vested interest in not being safe. Malcolm Gladwell, go look it up. And then there's Lawrence J. Peter and the Peter. I know I'm up talking too much. Well, I don't care. This guy spoke for 25 minutes and gave us very little new information. Everything he said was already in the record, and most of us knew it already. I'm giving you information that's new. He didn't. There's 15 minutes entitled for me, and there's nobody behind me. And you want to shut me up? Go ahead. Cut my mic like everybody else's. This is your responsibility to straighten it out, not mine. My grandchildren's lives are at stake, not mine. I'll be dead in years, if not weeks. You'll figure it out. Goodbye.
Thank you, Mary. Andrew, are there any others? Any other registered speakers?
No, there are not any.
All right, thank you, sir. So we will close the public participation portion of the meeting, and now we'll begin the action items on the agenda. All material related to these action items has been posted on the NYMTC website, www.nymtic.org. The first action item is to accept the March 18th, 2021 meeting synopsis. I'm requesting all voting members to announce your name and the agency you represent when you make a motion or a second. May I have a motion to accept the March 18th, 2021 meeting synopsis?
So moved. Yogesh Sanghvi, New York City DOT, representing Commissioner Henry Gutman.
Okay. Thank you, Yogesh. Is there a second?
Second, Chris Chatterton, Suffolk County.
And thank you, Chris. Okay, we will now, is there any discussion? Hearing no discussion, we'll now move by roll call, starting with the Lower Hudson Valley, Putnam County, Rockland County, and Westchester County, and on Long Island, Nassau County, and Suffolk County. Okay, so Lower Hudson, Putnam County.
Aye.
Rockland County,
Aye.
Westchester County,
Aye.
Nassau County,
Aye.
Suffolk County,
Aye.
City DOT moved it. Department of City Planning,
Aye.
and finally MTA.
Aye.
And New York State says aye. Thank you all. The motion passes. The next action item is to adopt resolution number 522, support of public transportation agency safety targets under the Federal Transportation Performance Management Requirements. I will now ask Sherry South of NYMTC staff to introduce this resolution. Please unmute Sherry's microphone.
Good morning, PFAC members. I'm here to introduce and seek your adoption of Resolution 522, which was previously circulated to you and members of the public. The purpose of Resolution 522 is to support an area public transportation agency safety targets under the Federal Transportation Performance Management Requirements. The Federal Transit Administration, FTA, published the final rule 49 CFR Part 673 on the Public Transportation Agency Safety Plan, PTASP, on July 19, 2018. Providers of public transportation are required to annually set targets for 4 transit safety performance measures, initially in 2020, but due to pandemic, the Federal Transit Administration, FTA, suspended enforcement of the rules through December 31, 2020. MPOs are required to establish performance targets no more than 180 days after the date on which the providers of public transportation establish the performance targets. The public transportation agencies responsible for service in NYMTC's planning area have established safety targets in their Public Transportation Agency Safety Plans, PTSPs, and thus NYMTC is required to establish its public transit safety targets by June 30th, 2021. The Metropolitan Planning Regulations give MPOs the option to 1, agree to program investments in support of these targets, or 2, set their own quantifiable targets, and NYMTC has chosen the former, that is, to program investments to support the Public Transportation Agency's targets. We are now asking for your adoption of Resolution 522, through which NYMTC will support the Public Transportation Agency Safety Performance Targets as established in each agency's PTASP by programming investment that support the achievement of these targets and to make the appropriate changes to the federal fiscal years 2020 to 2021 Transportation Improvement Program and the System Performance section of the fiscal year 2018 through 2025 Regional Transportation Plan to reflect these new targets. Thank you.
Thank you, Sherry. May I have a motion to adopt resolution number 522, support of public transportation agency safety targets under the Federal Transportation Performance Management requirements?
So moved. Sandra Fusco, Putnam County.
Thank you, Sandra. Is there a second?
Second, Jack Schmidt, New York City Department of City Planning.
Thank you, Jack. We will vote by roll call, starting with the Lower Hudson Valley. Putnam County,
Aye.
Rockland County,
Aye.
Westchester County,
Aye.
Nassau County,
Aye.
Suffolk County,
Aye.
New York City DOT,
Aye.
Department of City Planning,
Aye.
and finally MTA,
Aye.
and there's an aye from New York State DOT. Thank you, the motion passes. The next action item is to adopt resolution number 523, amendments to the state fiscal year 2021 to 2022 and 2020 to 2021 Unified Planning Work Program. I will ask State 2 Allen of NYMTC staff to introduce this resolution. Please unmute State 2's microphone.
Hi, good afternoon, PFAC members. This amendment relates to the 2020-2021 program as well as the 2021-2022 program. So for 2020-2021, New York City DOT is requesting to make some budget modifications to funding programmed for task in that program. And for the 2021-2022 UPWP, the Metropolitan Transportation Authority and Suffolk County are requesting to add previously programmed and ongoing planning projects into the current UPWP. These actions are consistent with the plan and none of them require new funding. NYMTC staff requests that you adopt this resolution.
Thank you, State 2. May I have a motion to adopt resolution number 523, amendment to the state fiscal year 2021 to 2022 and 2020 to 2021 Unified Planning Work Program?
So move, Pat Gurdon, Rockland County.
Thank you, Pat. Is there a second?
Second, Jack Schmidt, New York City Department of City Planning.
Thank you, Jack. Well, now let's vote by roll call. Putnam County,
Aye.
Rockland County,
Aye.
Westchester County,
Aye.
Nassau County,
Aye.
okay, Suffolk County,
Aye.
New York City DOT,
Aye.
City Planning,
Aye.
EPA.
Aye.
There's an aye from New York State DOT. Thank you. The motion passes. We'll now be briefed on the public comment period for NYMTC's next regional transportation plan by Program Manager Jan Khan. Please unmute Jan's microphone.
Thank you very much, Chairman and PFAC members. Good afternoon to you all and other attendees. It's really my pleasure to talk about the public comment period for moving forward, which is a new draft regional transportation plan for NYMTC, which goes out to the horizon year of 2050. Since it really signifies a critical milestone in the development of the new plan. Despite the adversities which we've all experienced, which we all know about, NYMTC, with the assistance of members of the public, have been able to put together this comprehensive draft plan, which needs to be in place by October 1st, 2021. The reason for this is that we are required to update the regional transportation plan every 4 years, and the current plan, Plan 2045, was adopted in September 2017. So that makes makes the need for the new plan to be in place by October 1st, 2021. Public review sessions for this new plan will be totally virtual and will commence on June 23rd through July 22nd. And starting tomorrow, Friday, June 18th, notices will start to go out to the public, which will spell out how folks can register for the public sessions, the review sessions. The notices will provide the web locations to access documents and also provide the dates and times for the review sessions. In terms of dates and times for the review sessions, though, the first session will be a region-wide session, and that will be July 1st. There will be 2 sessions. Start one from 12 p.m. to 1:30 p.m. and the other from 7 p.m. to 8:30 p.m. That will be followed by a session that will target the New York area, and that will be on Thursday, July 8th. Same timings, 12 to 1:30 and 7 to 8:30. Then on July 13th, we'll be targeting the Lower Hudson Valley, same timings. And then on July 12th, there will be the Long Island sessions, same timings. As I mentioned, the public review sessions will be all virtual, and members of the public will have access to the web portal, which will allow them to provide comments, starting at 8 a.m. on June 23rd. For those, based on our requirements, our language access procedures, basically, members of the public will be able to access the executive summary and on the web portal in Russian, Spanish, and 2 versions of Chinese. So really, we are moving ahead with the with the new plan, and the adoption of this plan is targeted for, between the periods of August and September. In August, there will be a recommendation by this August body for the plan to be adopted by the council, and then it will be adopted by the council in September. Thank you very much.
Thank you, John. Are there any questions from the members? Thanks, John. I hope you're successful with public sessions.
Thank you very much.
All right, the next, you're welcome. There's just a bit of housekeeping ahead of us. The next PFAC meeting has been scheduled for Thursday, August 19th, 2021. Details of this meeting will be made available 2 weeks prior to the meeting. As Jan mentioned, the next council meeting will be in September. We'll also have another meeting, on September 9th, 2021, with the members of the council to adopt the NYMTC next regional transportation plan. Details of this meeting will also be made available 2 weeks prior to the meeting. To conclude today's meeting, I ask for a motion to adjourn the meeting.
So moved, Naomi Klein, Westchester County.
Thank you, Naomi. I will second that. Is there any discussion? If there are no objections to the motion, this meeting is now adjourned. Thank you.